What is up, everyone? Mandy and Mike here. So we are here with Jenny, and we are going to dive into part number 5, episode number 5 of Building Jenny. So you want to tell us what we're going to learn today?
Today we're going to install U-joints and the drive shaft into the car.
Ooh, stay tuned.
Okay, so here we have our strange oval drive shaft that we're going to install in Jenny. And the first thing I'm going to do is install the universal joints into the drive shaft yokes. So these ones are spicers. I like the U-joints that come with a grease zerk so that I can grease them. If you're lazy and you don't grease them every race, then you might not want the greasable kind, because those other kinds seem to last longer if you don't grease them. These ones last a long time if you grease them. So, the first thing I'll do is decide which, is this yoke going to be in the front or the back? We know that if I say that this is the front yoke, and then it's going to be twisting this direction with the engine rotation. So with that rotation, I want the universal joint to be squeezing the grease zerk together. I don't want it to be trying to pull this weak spot in the U-joint apart. So I'll install it in this orientation where the grease zerk's going that way, and it's between these two parts here, and the yoke from the transmission is going to be pushing against the yoke on the drive shaft, not pulling it. So I like to pack a little bit of extra grease in these needle bearings so that they don't fall out during this process. If they do and you're missing one, you might as well throw this thing out and grab another one, because it's not worth the risk of having a failure. So I like to put it inside, make sure that the orientation is right. Get one started on and push it in. I use an arbor press. This one's from Harbor Freight. It's really cheap, but it gets the job done. It's a lot easier than a big bulky hydraulic press, but some of these yokes can be too tight tolerance-wise where they don't want to push in that easily. Now, if I tried to put this one in, it'd be hard to keep the needles engaged on both ends and not be 100% sure that one didn't fall over. So I'm going to push this past, push it down in and get the clip in and everything on this side before I even attempt to put that one in. So I just use a socket to push that in. So now you've got this way in there past where it needs to go. But that makes it much easier to get this other one started, and you know that it's in there right. Another way to tell that they're in all the way is these seals should be right up against there. If it goes on and stops like there, then you know you got one of those needle bearings flopped over. That's the worst thing that could happen here. So now this thing is in there, it can't go anywhere. You know, I'm positive that it's good. So I put the one clip in on this side, and I'm going to push this side all the way up against the clip so I can get the other clip in. These are a tight press fit, which is a good thing, so that you don't want them loose in there, or you'd have a vibration. So now, once you put the clips in, you gotta put your grease zerk in. And just takes a 5/16 1/4-inch drive. Now, you can see it's hard to get the socket in there. So I've taken the socket and sanded it down to a sharper point, because these are hard to get flush. So there, that's tight. And you want these to move nice and free. A lot of times, if it doesn't move free, an old school trick, like if it was kind of bound up from using the press, just to free it up, all you gotta do is just whack it on a piece of wood. When those two yoke ends are sprung together, it'll let them settle back out, and there won't be any pressure on this. Now, there's no slop in this at all, but it's nice and free. That's what you're looking for. So now we're doing the same thing to the rear of the drive shaft. It's going to be doing the same thing. We got the drive shaft yoke is going to be turning against the rear end yoke. So we want to make sure that our grease zerk is in that orientation where it's pushing it together again and not pulling it apart. So we'll repeat this process and get this installed. Move on to the next step. So now on Strange's drive shafts, they put a nice line from the drive shaft to the drive shaft yoke to line up the two yokes. This is called the drive shaft timing. This would vibrate if you had this off a few teeth and you just put it on any old which way. So definitely need to line those lines up. I also like to stamp the parts. I'll take and put an F and an F here for front, and an R and an R here for rear, so I know that the orientation that this goes together, and keep it that way for the lifespan of this drive shaft. Next thing I'm going to do is put the grease on the splines on both the yoke and the drive shaft when I put them together, so that they can slide in and out freely when the suspension's going up and down. As you can see, they date code the drive shaft. This one was made in January of 2020. It's very important to have a date on your parts, 3 of 20, so that you can keep track of the lifespan. With a big block, I only like to run a drive shaft about 1,500, 2,000 laps. It's almost similar to like your engine. Once it's time to rebuild the motor, you gotta rebuild the drive line. So, as well as like the U-joints should be changed probably every 300 hard laps, or maybe you can go a little longer if you're on a slippery racetrack. So it's good to date code this stuff so you know when it was installed and you know when you need to replace it. You'll notice once you have greased this really well that when you press it together, it'll actually hydraulic back apart. That means you're using really good grease and you've got a hefty amount on there. That's what you should have. Not only is this gonna lubricate it so they can move in and out, but it's gonna seal the dirt from getting down in those splines and trapped in there. Maybe some water when you're washing the car or other things. So use a lot of grease and use good grease. I'll wipe off the excess here. Next, we're going to install our transmission yoke. And before I do, I'm going to drill the bolt that holds it on with for safety wire so that I can make sure that it doesn't fall off. So you notice when you take the bolt out of the yoke that's in there, there's a lot of silicone stuck to the washer. This is important because the transmission will leak if you don't have it on there. I like to use a lot on here. Maybe it makes a mess, but I'd rather not have it leak. So I'll put it on the splines and around this area here, and that's going to seal that up so it won't leak. And then a little bit around the bolt, the center of the washer too. Now that I've got silicone on my fingers, I use the black silicone. This stuff's better for sealing up oil than the red or the gray. And then I'll grease the inside of the splines with grease. Outside I got the silicone. And then you want to grease this area because that's where the seal rides. That's also sealing the oil from leaking out. You don't want that to burn up. Now I've got more stuff all over my hands. When you're pulling your old yoke out of the transmission, you want to use gentle pressure evenly with 2 pry bars to pull this off. The last thing you want to do is hit this seal and ruin it with the pry bar. So just gently pry on either side, take your time getting this off. It is a pretty tight fit on the splines to get this off. And we're going to slide our strange oval billet yoke on. The reason I'm using these is because they're billet, they're stronger, and the design allows a little bit more range of motion with the U-joint so that you can move around more. Okay.
This is where you'll find Jenny's heart. Do you see it?
See, I waited until after I installed the bolt to drill the yoke for the safety wire, because I'm going to line up the hole on the yoke with where the hole in the bolt lands so that it's pulling it in a tight fashion. You would want it pulling this way so that the safety wire is holding it tight. If you held it the other way, it wouldn't do anything. I guess the length of how far to spin this, and then I'll put like the last turn in myself so that I don't go too far. Again, we're using silicone around the washer and grease around where the seal rides. and a little bit of grease on the splines. See, this one goes on much smoother and easier than the transmission yoke. Again, we're going to tighten it, and then wherever this hole lands, we're going to drill it for safety wire so that that can't come loose. These are supposed to be spring loaded. Mine's a little worn out, so I got to run it back into my own.
I see that.
When you put the drive shaft in, make sure that your front loop is already installed. The rear loop, they now have the bottom bolts on separately. It's 2 pieces, so you can get it on after the drive shaft's in, which is really convenient. So now all we got to do is tighten the straps up, and we're all set. So there's how I install my drive shaft in a big block dirt modified. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the videos and subscribe to the channel, the newsletter, and follow along at lunchtime live.